Welcome to all of you. Good afternoon to what I think is most of you, although I at least see one participant we have coming from Australia, and I have absolutely no idea what time it is there without looking it up. But welcome. We're so glad that you've taken an hour out of your day to be here and to interact with us. And thanks once again to our friends at Cadre for putting this webinar together and for facilitating all the technical side of what you're going to see today. We're going to talk a little bit about the Discovery Research PreK-12 Program. As mentioned, my name is Mike Steele. I'm a program officer in the Division of Research on Learning and currently a program lead. And my friend and colleague, Gavin Fulmer, is with us. Gavin will be chiming in occasionally as needed and have kind of first shot at the Q&A box. So please, throughout, if you have questions, please share them with us in the Q&A box. Gavin will be replying if there are things that have kind of easy, straightforward responses via text. If it's something that's easier for us to discuss, we'll note that it'll be answered live and we'll take care of it somewhere in the course of the next 47 minutes and 32 seconds. So with that, I'm going to proceed to share a little bit about Discovery Research PreK-12, or DRK-12, as we affectionately call it. The current solicitation is NSF 20-572. The submission deadline is October 6th of 2021. This is the same solicitation as we ran last year. When we revised our solicitations, we tended to do so with an eye towards having the same solicitation for at least a handful of years in a row. So if you were familiar with the program last year, you know that was a year that we revised the solicitation. So if you're familiar with it at that point, there will be no new surprises, and we'll talk about it. I will talk about some of the things that we did revise when we went through that last summer. The submission deadline, again, similar to in 2020, it's that first week in October. That moved up a little bit from traditionally where we had it in November, largely so that we can get decisions to you a little bit faster and in time for starting projects in the next school year. One important note and an important change that was made is that all proposals, you see this on the left, you're going to hear me say it about 12 more times today. All proposals must be submitted through research.gov or grants.gov. Our old friend slash frenemy, Fastlane, is no longer a vector for submitting your proposals. Research.gov, a lot easier to use, should sidestep some of the technical little complexities and bits of fun that you may have had if you've been familiar with Fastlane in the past. So again, all proposals have to come in through research.gov or grants.gov, no more Fastlane. So the DRK-12 program, as you see there on the screen, is really our flagship program about formal STEM education in the pre-K-12 settings. So enhancing the learning and teaching of STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, computer science, data science, all fall into that STEM umbrella for us. For pre-K-12 students and teachers through research and development of STEM education innovation and approaches. So what I'm going to share with you today is to give some broad picture about NSF policies and procedures that are helpful to know as you're working on your DRK-12 proposals and sending those in. I will describe the DRK-12 program and some of the project expectations in a little bit more detail. I'll give some thoughts about proposal preparation and the review process. There'll be plenty of resources that we'll share with you along the way, and some time for final questions, but there will be some spots kind of after each of those chunks that I'll pause for questions as well. And as mentioned, if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A box as we go. Don't be shy. So let's get started. The NSF Proposal and Awards Policies and Procedures Guide, or as we refer to it, and you see the link to the chat, in the chat directly to that document, the PAPG, is kind of your handbook for submitting NSF proposals. If you have a question about allowable costs or how to set up a budget or who's eligible to apply, those questions are answered in the PAPG. So that should be, if you can't find the solicitation, that should be your next stop in looking at some of those technical questions for how to move that idea from idea to NSF proposal. The new Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, which is NSF 22-1, becomes effective on October 4th, 2021. You'll note that that's 2 days before our solicitation deadline. So if you submit on or after October 4th, you are guided by 22-1. The current version of that is actually 20-1. We didn't do a 21-1 last year, but it's usually updated annually. So if you're running off of that one, there are not a whole lot of changes, but there are a couple that I will highlight a little bit later in the show. So you'll see those as we go. This sets all policy for submitting proposals to NSF. In any cases in which the solicitation says something that's different or more specific than the PAPG, the solicitation wins. That's the place where we can get a little bit more specific if there's something that we want to do a little bit differently than the Proposal and Awards Policies and Procedures Guide. So if you see places where they clash, go with the solicitation. How to submit. You may have heard me mention this, that DRK-12 now requires the use of research.gov or grants.gov. Submissions via Fastlane will no longer be accepted. I will say that a few more times between now and then. If you've been a DRK-12 awardee or any NSF awardee, you're used to going into research.gov to submit your annual reports, to submit no-cost extension requests. So it will be that same way into the system that you're used to. A lot of times we get asked, what are you focused on? What does NSF want to see in a DRK-12 proposal? And my favorite response to that is to hold up a mirror. NSF is a field-driven funder, which means we are driven by the ideas that you have out in the field, what you are interested in doing, what you see as innovative, transformative research and development. We fund STEM education in any area of science or engineering that's supported by the agency. And as program officers, program directors, we use those kind of interchangeably oftentimes at NSF. We're a part of the decision-making process, so we can give you some feedback on an idea, and I'll share a little bit as we go about how to get that feedback if you're interested. But we can't really take an active role in shaping those ideas. So the ideas we count on coming from all of you out there in the field. We can talk about, do we see it as a fit for DRK-12? Is there another program that it's a better fit for? And are happy to kind of give advice on what we see as the strengths and the challenges of an idea as you're starting to move towards submitting a proposal. But we're not going to kind of reach in there and say, okay, instead of this data source, you should collect this data source. So we are responsive to you as a field for ideas and projects that you're interested in doing. I'll share a little bit here about the proposal review process and timeline. You're going to see this graphic come up again at the end. So just to note, the piece on the left with proposal preparation, when we announce an opportunity and send it out to the community, DRK-12 has been a long-standing program. It's one of our flagship programs, and our largest one in the Division of Research on Learning. So many of you already know about it, and in fact, that's evidenced by the fact that you're here. And then those proposals come in and get submitted. What happens then at that mark of proposal receipt at the bottom is there's about a 6 to 9 month process from when you submit that to when there's a decision on a proposal. And what happens from there is that as program officers, we get your proposals, we kind of sort them into logical groupings based on the domains that you're interested in, based on the type of project, based on methodologies sometimes, and chunk proposals together and solicit review panels of your peers to come in and give us that first take on those proposals. So the very first bit of the merit review process happens via a panel of your peers who give their evaluations of the work. It's after that, then once things come out of panel and the panel says, these are the things that we think are the most promising out of this set of proposals you've asked us to take a look at. Then as program officers, we take them, collectively discuss them, analyze them, make recommendations for funding. And then even when that happens, there are several more steps. This is kind of the schoolhouse rock of NSF, how a proposal becomes an award. After we discuss these as program officers, then even if we recommend something forward, it's not done yet. It goes through our division director for their analysis and concurrence, and then it goes to the Division of Grants and Agreements for some of the more technical and fiscal review parts of the process. And then at that point, if everything has gone as planned, that's when we move to the status of an award. So that whole process takes between 6 and 9 months, and it doesn't always happen at the same time. So we always get this question of, I'll get an email saying, hey, so my friend so-and-so has heard about their DRK-12 proposal. I haven't heard about mine. What does that mean? And that just means that you haven't heard about yours yet. The timeline for the process, things happen kind of at different points in time in the process. So just because someone else has heard doesn't mean anything good, bad, or indifferent on yours. It just means that you haven't heard yet. Always get some questions about eligibility. So any organization is eligible to apply. It's important to know that grants are not to individuals, they are to organizations. So your organization, your university, your educational nonprofit, your K-12 school are the ones that apply. Any organization must be registered in the sam.gov system. If you don't know if you are, that's a good thing to ask some of the people in your organization who handle grants and awards work. If you're a first-time prospective awardee, first of all, welcome. Thanks for being here. We're always interested in diversifying our the pool of our proposals. But I would commend to you some particular resources that you see here. Those are the prospective new awardee guide, the process for pre-award reviews of new organizations, and the federal requirements for awards. These are in place to make sure if you're a new awardee, if you're a new organization or one that hasn't had federal funding, that you have the fiscal capabilities in place to be able to properly administer a federal grant. So those resources will direct you to everything you need to know about how that review proceeds. As an organization, we've got a question. As an organization, can you bring on an unaffiliated individual as a co-PI? And I'll note that Gavin's working on and answer that question. But the lead organization is really, really important. If you have a lead organization and other subcontracts, it's the lead organization that's the one that's accountable for fiscal review. So that's something to remember as you go through. Another mechanism that you may have seen are what we call DCLs, or Dear Colleague Letters. We love our TLAs, 3-letter acronyms at NSF. Dear Colleague Letters are not new funding opportunities, but they call the field's attention to existing areas of focus or existing that point to existing funding opportunities. They'll accept proposals in a particular area. So an example we have here of a DCL that's active right now is one about quantum education and workforce development. So that particular Dear Colleague Letter describes what we're particularly interested in across the agency in terms of quantum education, quantum computing education, quantum computing workforce development, and notes several different solicitations that would accept proposals related to that idea. So it's just a way of calling attention to some specific focal areas. So when you see those, make sure you pay attention to what the programs are that are listed in there that are interested in receiving those ideas. Just a quick overview of some other programs. As I mentioned, DRK-12 is our formal K-12 education program. So anything that you may be doing, interested in student learning, interested in teaching in STEM disciplines that happens in the context of formal K-12 education, DRK-12 is your home. Our sibling in informal education is that first one you see, ASIL, Advancing Informal STEM Learning. So if you're interested in doing some of the same things that DRK-12 does, but in an informal setting, in a summer camp setting, in a museum setting, or other outside educational infrastructure, in a maker space, ASIL is another one to look at. These other programs we have here have particular foci. So for example, EHR Core Research is your home for basic research, whereas DRK-12 is a little bit more applied. And of course, there's intersections between those. Innovative technology experiences for students and teachers is really about new technological innovations. I already saw a mention of CS for All, is our particular focus on computer science. And there are some intersections with all of these. REDL is one that you may have heard of as cyber learning a few years ago. And I'm really excited about this last one, racial equity in STEM education. So it's a particular solicitation focused on addressing inequities related to race in STEM education. As you can kind of hear from the description of these programs, many of them have intersections with DRK-12. So if you're wondering, am I a better fit for this program or that program in scope, the first thing to do is look at the two solicitations and see what are they specifically focused on. So for example, if you look at iTest, there's some specific aspects of iTest that deal with workforce development, that deal with partnerships and broadening participation, that are called out in a particular way that the DRK-12 solicitation doesn't have. So you'll see some differences there. And that's the first place to look at where your idea best fits. If you do that and you're still not clear, send us a note and I'll share a little bit with you about how to get in touch with us at the end of our presentation today. But get in touch with us, share something and say, where do you think this best fits? Most of our program officers in the Division of Research on Learning work across multiple programs. So we have some fluency. I've worked in probably almost all of those programs that you see listed there. And we are happy to share with colleagues who are the leads in those programs if we need kind of second, third, or fourth opinion. And you see in the chat, there's a phone number to call and an email to send that gets the DRK-12 program. You might say, well, I'm used to reaching out to particular program officers individually. I'm going to share with you when we get to the end a little bit about kind of how our approach is shifting on that. So with that, let's get into talking a little bit about DRK-12. You've seen this goal before. You've heard me mention this idea of formal education. So realize DRK-12 is about research and development in formal STEM education settings. And the research and development part is important. You have to have both. So it's great that you're interested in developing this fabulous new curriculum. We absolutely are excited about that. NSF has funded many, many curriculum projects in the past. Along with that, you need a rigorous educational inquiry that goes along with that piece, where you're trying to understand what students learn from the implementation of that curriculum, or you're trying to understand what sort of teacher supports teachers need to implement a curriculum well. I mean, if you're looking at both of those things, how it impacts students' self-image in a STEM discipline. And I'm gonna actually click the button on that question that just came in. You can focus on pre-K for DRK-12, even though we've got the K in the title. Pre-K is acceptable. In terms of whether or not your setting is considered a formal setting, that's something that we'd love for you to share with us. If you have a question about that, send us a note and we're happy to kind of weigh in on that individually. Because I know particularly when we're talking about pre-K, and there's some places where pre-K is under state auspices and some places where it's less formal than that. So we're happy to help out with that. A lot of times we get asked, so what have you funded? What does a good proposal look like? You can find a number of examples. You can find all of the DRK-12 projects at that link that we have on that page that is now also in the chat. So those are examples of DRK-12 projects. On the NSF site, you can search for those projects and you can find titles and abstracts. Things you will not find there is anything other than that. So if you're interested in getting the proposal that was submitted for that grant, I'm very sorry, we're not allowed to share those with you. There's nothing that says you can't reach out to the person who submitted it and ask them. If you're interested in seeing what the project has produced, I'm sorry, we don't have that, but our friends at Cadre tend to. Cadre being a resource center for DRK-12 projects. Projects have spaces there where they can share outcomes, they can share materials they've developed, they can share presentations that they've made related to the project. So title and abstract is what you'll get on the NSF page. And if you're interested in learning more, I'd point you to Cadre, I'd point you to reaching out to those individual projects and the contact people for them. As I mentioned, the current solicitation is the same as last year, NSF 20-572, that submission deadline, and that's a firm deadline. Please submit early if you have a technical problem. I am happy to help you work it out, and our fabulous program staff are happy to help you work through it. Our research.gov tech support desk, happy to work you through it. Just remember, if you're waiting until October 6th to do it and you run into a glitch, plan on probably a pretty lengthy hold time in getting in touch with our desk because traffic is always heavy. And if we pass that deadline of 5 p.m. in your local time zone, there's not a lot that we can do. If you're in the process of working through something, by the way, with the help desk, at the time that your deadline passes, please keep all that documentation. There are some cases in which if we see that there's a technical problem that just couldn't be solved in time, that we can grant waivers. But the really easy way to get around this is submit early. So I can't encourage that enough. And have I mentioned that we're not using Fastlane this year? I feel like I haven't done that. We're using research.gov and grants.gov exclusively for DRK-12. We'll share a little bit here about the anatomy of the program because this is another place where we tend to get a lot of questions. So there are kind of three categories here that I want to talk about. Strand is kind of what you're thinking about doing for the project. What's the focus of the project? Is it teaching? Is it learning? And I realize that those two strands are very interrelated. As a former DRK-12 awardee myself, a lot of times I feel like, oh, is this really a teaching study or is it a learning study? And in reality, usually it's got elements of both. But in selecting a strand, think about what you want to foreground and what you want to background. So let me go back to a curriculum implementation example. So if I'm developing a curriculum and I'm working with teachers on their professional learning and they're implementing it in the classroom, and most of my data collection is around what teachers learned and looking at that implementation and collecting some classroom video and analyzing it, thinking about how teachers are making sense of that. And I've also got some student learning measures that I'm interested in, like maybe I'm looking at the end of unit assessments or some of the formative assessments during the unit to characterize what students learned. That definitely feels like to me that the teaching is the main focus, and learning's there, but it's a little bit more in the background. In contrast, if I've got a curriculum that I've enacted for a while, I've done some piloting work with it, I know kind of how to get teachers up to speed with it, and I'm going to give them some professional learning, but I'm really interested in what students learn from that and collecting multiple sources of data related to that student learning. That's a case that feels like the learning's a little bit more front and center and that the teaching is there, but it's more in the background. So think about it from a foreground background standpoint. Our assessment strand is really important because it's about developing, studying, understanding assessments of teaching or learning, or sometimes both, and how those operate in the STEM formal education ecosystem. So that one always feels a little cleaner to me. The teaching and learning feels a little bit squishier. But again, if you're trying to figure out where yours should live, send us a note, send us a one-page summary. We're happy to share our thoughts about that. There are many different project types. Let me take those first four as a set because they kind of run the gamut from just getting our feet wet with an idea to really thinking about an idea that scales up. So you've got everything from exploratory, where you're doing some theory building, you're testing something out, you're trying to figure out what's a good framework for kind of building some work later on. But doing some pilot work, doing some exploratory work. You should have some links to theory. You can't be entirely theory free, but maybe this is about building theory. A design and development project, and I'll get into this a little bit more as we go, is really about designing and testing some sort of educational innovation. And maybe you've done a little bit of piloting, or you've built some theory, you've got that, now you're ready to build the thing and try the thing out. And there's both early stage and late stage design and development. Again, I'll talk about that a little bit more. Impact and implementation and improvement are all when you're in positions where you've got a thing, you've got an innovation, you feel fairly good about it, it's fairly well designed, and you're trying to figure out issues of bringing it to scale. Impact really is kind of more of a traditional, like, let's scale it up, let's bring it to multiple places in the way that we've got it, and try to figure out, is it working in different settings? Implementation improvement, I think, is the most underrated project type that we have, because it's really about taking an innovation and looking at zooming in and saying, all right, we're going to implement this maybe in one place or a handful of places, and we're going to really take a look at what those contextual factors are that contribute to the success. Like, what does it really mean when the rubber hits the road here, and the factors that we have to take into account. Obviously, you can hear that my canine colleagues very passionate about implementation, and so I'd encourage you to take a look at that. Synthesis and conference are a little bit different animals. So synthesis are research syntheses and meta-analyses. We have places for those. Conference, exactly what it sounds like. You're bringing some people together, and both of these cases, you still have to attend to that research and development idea. So if you're holding a conference, you're getting people together to talk about data science in pre-K-12 education, that's great. We're super excited for you to do that. But there has to be some data collection and some research components to that as well, for it to be fundable under DRK-12. Funding level off to the right there, you see there's levels 1, 2, and 3 that correspond to different dollar amount ceilings and different numbers of years. You can mix and match anything you see in green over there on funding levels with any of the colored project types and any of the strands. So you can submit a level 2 design development in the teaching strand. You can submit a level 3 exploratory project in the assessment strand. That might be really weird, but it's allowable. So you can mix and match those, fit it to what the work is asking of you. And you don't have to always ask for the maximum. People oftentimes ask, is a lower dollar amount project more competitive, or do you want to fund more of those or fewer of those? And we still review on all of those same criteria of intellectual merit and broader impacts. So I can't say no, it's going to be more competitive if you put it at a lower dollar amount. It'll just be a lower dollar amount. And when we're getting down to looking to spend the last few dollars in the pool, sometimes there's a time when we could fit a lower dollar amount proposal that we couldn't fit a higher dollar amount proposal. So make sure it matches what you want to do. Synthesis and conference, you see, have their own funding levels and own durations over there. And please pay particular attention to conference, because this is the case where the solicitation is more narrow than the proposal and award policies and procedures guide in terms of what's allowable for a conference. If you have questions on that, once again, happy to address those in the Q&A. Also happy to address those individually if you have a question about your particular idea. So we've reached the halfway point. I want to transition now into talking about some of the highlights of the solicitation. And I'm going to highlight changes from the prior solicitation, which was 2 years ago. So if you heard this talk last year, nothing new in what I'm about to say. So the changes that we made in the fiscal year 21 solicitation, we clarified some of the expectations for design and development, clarified a little bit about the impact project type. We noted some focal areas. These are not the only areas that are fundable, but we wanted to say these are things that do fit into DRK-12 specifically. So early childhood STEM, yes, that fits. Computer science, yes, that fits. Computational thinking, yes, that fits. If we were rewriting it this year, we'd probably say data science, yes, that fits. And we also upped the level for synthesis proposals in terms of dollar amounts and duration, recognizing that doing a synthesis or meta-analysis is serious work, and it needs serious time and serious funding. And we have that available to you. So I want to dive in a little bit to design and development, particularly because it tends to be our most popular category and the one that we get probably the most questions around. So design and development, you've got theory. You've got a theoretical and empirical justification for the innovation you're interested in proposing. You've thought about how the features of that innovation relate to the theory. You've got a theory of change or a logic model. I'm going to show some examples of those in just a moment as we go through. The goals of your project relate to those ideas that you've justified its importance. You've talked about how this is innovative or transformative. You've got it. We get more good quality proposals than we have dollars to fund them. So it's really important to say what's new here, what's innovative about what you're proposing. How is it likely to lead to improvements in practice that aren't just about the students and the teachers that you're going to work with, but have the potential to grow beyond that. Almost every project we get, it's no doubt when I read it, like this is going to be good for the teachers or the students who would be engaged in this work. It's going to benefit them, but our bar because of that is even higher. The bar is really, is this going to contribute new understandings and new learning to the field writ large? In design and development projects, we're looking for methodology that's related to feasibility, to understanding the promise of the work for achieving the outcomes that you had in mind. And there should be an iterative development process. If you're proposing a design and development project over 4 years, you're probably not going to design it in the first 6 months and just spend the rest of the time implementing it. There's going to be information that you collect from that implementation that's going to feed into revisions. It's going to look at changes. We're really interested in understanding how you're thinking about that process in rolling out. Early and late stage design and development, you've got to be clear on that iterative development process, no matter whether it's early or late stage. If you've already got something that's designed, it's probably a late stage proposal. If you're still kind of pulling a design together, then it's probably an early stage design and development. And the late stage, we're really looking for you to start thinking about estimates of effect size by the time that project is done, because that then transitions us into thinking about how to bring a project to scale, which transitions us into thinking about the impact category. So a couple of highlights when we change the solicitation related to impact projects. An impact study really should have a description of what that innovation is, and a rationale for why it's the right moment to start examining its impact. It should have a theory of change. It should be built on that. You should have data from piloting work that has existing evidence that supports that this thing is promising. And it shouldn't, and the impact has to go beyond just, we're going to do some pre and post data collection. It really has to be more nuanced than that. It should talk about what the problem is you're trying to address, how the innovation is an improvement over what is already out there, why you're at the moment where it's well suited to an efficacy or effectiveness study, and have a real detailed description of the measures and the reasons that those measures are technically adequate for the constructs you're looking to study, for the population, information on recruitment, how you plan to account for nested data structures, schools within districts, within states or regions as appropriate. That's not to say it has to be entirely quantitative. Mixed method and qualitative impact studies are definitely something that we can entertain, but the method has to fit with what you're trying to study and the scope of what you're looking for. We also have some more detailed expectations related to synthesis proposals that we made the last time around that reflect some of the advances that have taken place in the past several years in synthesis and meta-analysis methodology. So if you're not up to speed on that and that's something you're interested in, I commend you to that section of the solicitation for more information. I mentioned change models, logic models. I know it's really exciting for everybody. So let me share a couple of models that wouldn't be good choices to use for DRK-12. So you take a look at this one, like this is almost soup to nuts, like talking about all the elements that relate to effective STEM education, from student engagement to teacher quality, to the nature of the discipline, to equity considerations, to communities of practice. This is too big. This is not the right grain size. So you can situate your model within some parts of this for sure. But to say, here's our logic model, we're going to look at everything in here, that's way too much for a DRK-12 project. So that's a little bit too big of a grain size. Here's an example that's kind of on the other end of the spectrum. This one's a little bit overly simplistic. So let's say we're doing an intervention related to fractions. We're interested in doing some PD with teachers and understanding changes to their their pedagogical content knowledge related to fractions, and then we're going to see them teach some fractions lessons and then assess what students learned. This is, in some sense, it's better. But the important piece that's not clear here is, what are these things going to look like? These nodes need to be unpacked. The constructs that are at play here need to be operationalized. And the proposal should really deliver on the idea of that iterative development. So how it's not going to be just this linear process through your project. It's going to be a matter of, there's going to be feedback you get when teachers are teaching those lessons that influences back into the professional development. So those feedback loops should be incorporated in here, and ideas about how those constructs should be measured would be a better iteration of this model. I have paused for questions after this slide, so now's a great time to type them into the Q&A box. So just a couple of notes about commitment, about interest, about focal areas. So I mentioned some areas of particular interest for us in funding. Those are not limiting. We'll take projects across the STEM landscape, but we just note those because those are places where we often get questions like, is this a fit? Does this work in the DRK-12 mission? If you have projects in those areas, they still should hew to that core DRK-12 mission. So they still should be research and development proposals. They still should have all the elements that the solicitation describes that you need for a successful proposal. If you're wondering about whether your idea fits, please send us a note, chat with a program officer. What's really helpful is if you can send a 1 to 2 page summary of your idea to that DRK-12 at nsf.gov email address. And that gives us a starting point to go with. And you can add specific questions to that, say, here's some other things that I'm wondering about, or I'm wondering about fit. And we're happy to respond to those and address those. And we usually do that relatively quickly, anywhere between a few hours and kind of usually at most a week. And we'll get that turned back to you. So send those early and often. Questions so far? Thank you to everybody who's asked questions thus far, and thank you to Gavin for answering several. All right, there we go. Thanks, Amelia. For more exploratory proposals, Amelia asks, is there an ideal range of number of participants or sample size? Let's see. Doing a quick calculation, carry the one. I'm not supposed to talk about carrying anymore, right? Regroup. Okay. No, there is not. It should fit what you're trying to study. So I would hate to give an answer here that's a range that would exclude good ideas that may live outside of that range. So I'd say as you're thinking about the number of participants, as you're thinking about the sample size, think about what are the ideas that you want to understand about this exploratory idea. What's going to help you best in theory building? Like, for example, if you're working on a curricular innovation that particularly is designed to address a more diverse population, then I'd say you're going to want to justify your sample by saying, we're working with this number of schools that represent these different diverse dimensions across student demographics, across socioeconomic status, whatever's important to you for the theory building. So I would look to I would look to build your sample in ways that make sense for what you're trying to learn from the innovation. And that's really where reviewers are going to judge it. And make sure you make that argument explicit. We're working with 3 schools and here are the demographics. And this is why this set of characteristics is exactly right for what we want to study. So make that case explicit. I would hate to have a set of reviewers spend their time talking about, is the number right, rather than engaging with the substance of your proposal. Can a project be both early and late stage, or you pick one for the duration of the project? You pick one for the duration of the project. That was an easy question to answer. Pat Herbst asks, hi Pat, do studies of innovations on teacher learning need to document eventual impacts on student learning? Not necessarily. So you can focus just on teacher learning. That's one of the reasons we have the teaching strand. So it doesn't have to go all the way down into student learning. But again, the scope of the project should match the duration and the dollar amount you're looking for, and should justify why looking at that slice is innovative and transformative to the field. So I'd say if it's an area that we already know a lot about what teacher learning looks like, then probably, yeah, I'd bet reviewers are going to be more interested in starting to see some student effects out of that. If it's an area where there's not much that we know about teacher learning, or you're taking a new spin on that, then absolutely that may be enough. So that's how I'd make sense of that idea. Can a K-12 school district be the PI? Yes, with all the caveats we have about making sure that they have the financial capacity to handle an award. What is the benefit of submitting a collaborative project versus subaward, separate linked submissions? That's a good question, Bree. And I'll say it depends. That's actually more a decision for you. You can submit a proposal from one institution that has subawards that then sends a chunk of that money somewhere else. But the awards, remember, are to the institutions. So that's a case where that lead institution has the responsibility for all the administration of that proposal. You can also submit linked proposals, we call these collaborative, where each institution kind of submits their own version of the proposal and has administration of their own budget. You can use each individual institution's indirect cost rates and things like that. In those cases, there's some different rules that govern that work. I won't get into those in detail because it's a lot of in the weeds. But then each institution gets a piece of that award and has autonomy over what they do with that. So there's a lot of just kind of personal and institutional preference on that front. And happy to engage with people a little bit more about that if they've got questions particular to their circumstances. I'm going to move forward. Keep asking the questions in the chat. Gavin will, in the Q&A, Gavin will stay on that, and we'll have a couple more pauses for questions as we go. In terms of proposal preparation, I mentioned that we're submitting through research.gov and grants.gov, not Fastlane, and the 2 editions of the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide that are in effect. Section 5 of the solicitation has the specific proposal preparation and submission instructions. So if you're looking for technical details about what to submit, that's the place to start. And there's a recent informational webinar that there's a link to in the chat for how to use research.gov for proposal submission. So if you're the one responsible for doing that in your particular institution, that's a good place. That's a good resource for you. The project summary is that 1-page summary right on the front of it, not the 15-page project description. I want to talk about a few important things in here. The first sentence of your project summary should tell us the type exploratory design development, et cetera. The main strand you're addressing. The second sentence should tell us information about the STEM discipline and the grade or age levels addressed. And there should be separate sections in that one-page summary on the intellectual merit and broader impact, our two National Science Board criteria that we review all proposals with respect to. I'll talk about those two criteria in a bit, but why are we so locked into that first sentence, second sentence stuff? In part, that project summary is what we look at when we start to group proposals. So if you want your proposal to be in a group with other projects that are doing similar work in similar content areas with similar grade levels, it is in your own best interest to please do those things. It helps us get that proposal in front of the right people to review it who have the expertise in those areas. So please, please, please help us out by doing that. Another question that we get a lot are about evaluations or advisory boards. And this is in the solicitation, this is described in mechanisms to assess the success of your project. Every proposal must have an external mechanism to assess the success. That could be an advisory board. That could be an external review panel or a third-party evaluator. It could be both of those things. It should fit what you're trying to understand. And remember, this is separate from your research questions. Your research questions is the work that your team wants to do to understand the impact of the innovation that you're developing and deploying. The mechanisms to assess success are, is the project achieving the goals that it set out to do? How well is this project doing the things, doing that research and doing that development? A good proposal will talk about what the expertise is of those external reviewers, whatever configuration you use, how it relates to the goals of the proposal, and has specific questions for those mechanisms to assess success, almost like kind of a meta set of research questions, and specifies how you're going to use that information. If you've got an advisory board that's going to meet once a year, how is that getting incorporated? And how does that make sense based on your project? If you've got something that has more rapid cycles of design and development, maybe having a board that only meets once a year doesn't make sense. Maybe you need to think about a different sort of mechanism that provides more rapid response, but smaller scale feedback in a shorter time scale. So think about what makes sense for your particular proposal. There are some great resources on Cadre's website about advisory boards and external evaluators, and we're always happy to address questions about those as well. Get a lot of questions about supplementary documents. These are the only ones that you see up there that are allowable. Everything has to have a data management plan, postdoctoral mentoring plan, obviously only if you have a postdoctoral scholar that you've written in, a list of the personnel on the proposal, and brief letters of collaboration. Don't add extra things to these, please. Help us help you. The Proposal Award Policies and Procedures Guide has recommended language for letters of collaboration. It's very sparse, but there's a very good reason for that. If your letter starts to drift into the area of somebody endorsing why this proposal is fabulous and the best thing since sliced bread that they've ever seen, then it becomes a letter of endorsement and it becomes unallowable, and you risk your proposal being returned without review. So we really, really implore you to use that suggested language. If you have particular questions or concerns about that, always happy to address those on a case-by-case basis. We always get a ton of questions about budget. What should the budget be? What should I do? And my #1 message is it should be consistent with the level of work. You don't have to request the maximum. And that's really helpful. Again, I want a review panel to be talking about the substance of your proposal, not getting in the weeds with saying, boy, that seems like an awful lot of money for the things that they're asking to do. So make sure you've justified that budget well and that it fits with the scope of work that you're proposing. Because then we don't have to talk about the budget. We can talk about the intellectual ideas. The 2-month salary rule is one we get a lot of questions about always. You cannot have more than 2 months of salary for senior personnel on NSF grants unless you justify why that's necessary. We will look at those current and pending documents. We will look at all of that. We will ask questions if there are challenges with this. And this does not just apply to universities. There's a misconception out there about this. This applies to any institution. If you're asking for more than 2 months of salary across all NSF grants, then you have to justify why that makes sense. A couple of things, and this is the new guidance from the 22-1 PAPG. There's new guidance that was in the last one about templates for current and pending support and biosketches. Those are new. Make sure you use those, please. We can't accept, they'll get kicked right back out before I even see it if you don't. Biosketches now under 22-1 will be 3 pages. So if you're really hot for that 3-page biosketch, submit on October 4th or later. So that's one of the most suggested changes. So the suggested language for letters of collaborations for any NSF proposal. Yes, that's a question that came up. Clarify 2 months of salary. Does it apply to research scientists whose salary comes from externally funded projects? Yes, it applies to everybody in every institution. So if you're asking for more than 2 months of salary, and you have somebody who's a soft funded research scientist sort of position, tell us that and use that for your justification. But you still have to have that justification in there. It has to be there. So oftentimes we get questions about are the reasons that proposals get returned without review. And yes, there are. You see them listed here. I won't go into detail on all of them, but I will say something about that second bullet, too similar to a previously submitted proposal. You can't have a proposal that is not substantively changed. Every proposal is treated as a new submission. So if it's too similar, we will look internally and compare it to previous proposals. If it's too similar, if all you've done is just change the date and you haven't responded to the reviews from the last time, then it may get returned without review. So making sure that you've done some work in revising that proposal. You shouldn't explicitly address, here's what we've changed since last time, because your reviewers will not get to see what you submitted last time. It's treated as a new proposal. But we need to see that you've made an effort to make changes to those proposals. And then just any unauthorized documents and things like that. Those are places where there tend to be issues where we have to return something without review. And it's always sad when we have to do that. I want to talk just for the next 2 minutes and 28 seconds about the proposal, the merit review process. Proposals are reviewed in panels that are composed of external experts, researchers, content experts. If you'd like to be one of those and you're not submitting to DRK-12 this year, let us know. We're always looking for good reviewers. So they're the first people you have to convince that this is a good idea. If a review panel doesn't like an idea, a proposal that comes in, there's not a lot I can do as a program officer about that. Usually that means that the proposal is going to be declined. So this is your first line of defense. And the 2 merit review elements that every proposal has to meet by National Science Board edict, which is our governing body, is intellectual merit and broader impacts. Intellectual merit, I look at as, why is it good science? In this case, why is it good educational science to do? Like, why is this a thing that's innovative, that's transformative, that's going to help us understand something important about STEM education? And broader impacts is really about, why does this matter beyond the people that I'm doing it with? How is this going to impact the field? How is it going to build our understanding of what it means to do effective STEM education? There are some additional elements here. I'm not going to read those 5, but if you're interested in thinking about those, and those relate to both criteria. So these are the questions that we provide reviewers to help them think about how to write a review of your proposal, so that you are seeing exactly what we share with them in terms of thinking about intellectual merit and broader impacts. And as I mentioned, you look at the center here, the panel, the review panel, your reviewers are the first people who will encounter these ideas, who will rate your proposal with respect to intellectual merit and broader impacts. So you're going to convince your peers first. Once that happens, when they say, these are the things that we think are particularly good in this set of proposals that you shared with us, that's when then we get to look across that subset and say, all right, what in here really bubbles to the top as program officers? What in here do we want to fund? And we look at issues of portfolio balance. There's one legendary year that we got some innumerable number of proposals related to high school geometry, and it would have been delightful to fund them all. and several were very strong, but we have to look at, okay, make sure we fund across all the areas of STEM education that we're interested in. I'll pause for questions in just a moment here, but I wanted to remind you, for further information, here are the phone number and the email contact. If you may have noticed in recent years, we've moved away from here are all the specific program officers in a program to this generic email address. And you might think, oh, generic email address, like that's not going to go to anybody. Hi, it ends up on my desk actually as the program lead. So when you email that address, it will come directly to me. The reason for that is then you don't have to rely on knowing what different program officers' expertise are. And we have people that come and go at NSF in part because we use rotating program officers, and we always have staffing changes. So this takes it out of your court to determine who's the right person for this to get to. Send it to that email address. If it's a question I can answer right out of the gate, you're going to hear right back from me on it. If it's something where I want to send it to somebody with a particular area of expertise, I'll send, for example, if it's a science education, teaching proposal, I may send it over to Gavin, who's an expert in that area. And I'll make sure it gets in the hands of somebody who can really respond and have that conversation with you about the idea. So please send to that main email address and let us do the hard work of directing traffic. And we're happy to connect with you for half-hour meetings, for reading those 1 to 2 page summaries and providing some feedback on them. So additional questions, and I see some coming in here, and I'll answer them live. If you submit prior to October 4th, yes, PAPG 20-1 is what governs that. It's just automatic based on the submission date. I don't have any I don't have any influence over that, unfortunately. Are there examples of data management plans available? We can't send them to you. There are some resources on Cadre's website that talk about elements of proposal preparation. I'd direct you over there to take a look. And if you know someone who submitted a proposal, you can always ask them, would they send their proposal to you, or would they send their data management plan over to you? And I see Gavin working on an answer on research.gov and page numbers. Research.gov has been constantly updated and iterated. So if you've run into problems in the past, I can't guarantee they've been solved, but I know that the team certainly knows about them. Other questions that people have in the last couple of minutes we have available to us. You see a link in the chat to the proposal toolkit, which has a ton of proposal writing resources, and they are fabulous. I commend those to you. While we're getting the last question or two in here, I will once again thank our Cadre colleagues for hosting the webinar and point you to all of those resources of interest, the funded projects, recent publications, spotlights on particular topics, the proposal toolkit. There's a ton of information on Cadre's website that's helpful to you. And I will thank Gavin once again for doing fabulous work in the Q&A box. If something comes in the next couple of seconds, we probably have just enough time to address it. But I'll say if we don't, please reach out to us. Send us an email, give us a call. We're happy to address your questions as you're working towards proposal development and submission. So with that, not seeing any other open questions, I will thank you again for spending an hour of your day with us. And again, don't hesitate to reach out. We're absolutely happy to chat with you about the program. Happy proposal writing. Have a lovely rest of your week.